So there was this 21-year-old penguin named Grapekun, and he spent the literal last days of his life desperately staring at a piece of cardboard.
Right.
If you don't know the story, Grapekun lived in a Japanese zoo, and after being rejected by his long-term mate for a younger penguin, actually, he was just entirely devastated, like completely crushed.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he stopped eating, he isolated himself. So the zookeepers, trying to, I guess, cheer him up, they placed a cardboard cutout of an anime penguin character right in his enclosure. And Grapekun became completely overwhelmingly besotted with it.
He fell in love with a piece of cardboard.
Exactly. He fell in love with it. He stood by it day and night, just staring at this flat, lifeless image until he eventually died of old age, just completely ignoring the real physical world around him. Welcome to the Morning Roundup. I mean, I start with that tragedy because today, millions of human beings are doing the exact same thing.
Yeah, it's a really haunting image to open with, honestly.
Right.
But it's entirely fitting for what we're looking at today.
Yeah.
Because when you find yourself in an environment where, the natural bonds have failed, an artificial replacement, even a two-dimensional one, can become dangerously seductive.
Right. And that is the absolute core of our mission today on the Morning Roundup. Because, I mean, we've spent the entire morning watching this incredibly massive, incredibly diverse, just towering stack of videos.
Huge stack.
Yeah, we are talking about everything from dense philosophical lectures and like historical deep dives to internet dating rants, pop culture commentary, and even orthodox homilies. And we sifted through all of it to find the hidden connections that you might have missed.
Mhm.
What we found is that society right now is grappling with a massive echoing void. The traditional structures of meaning have just collapsed. And we are watching in real time as people scramble to find increasingly bizarre or highly transactional or entirely virtual ways to fill that empty space.
Well, nature abhors a vacuum, right? Like, when the old systems of meaning evaporate, human beings don't just sit quietly in the dark and accept the emptiness. They build new idols.
Yeah.
They construct new systems, even if those systems are inherently flawed or predatory or, as you mentioned with the penguin, entirely artificial. The human drive for connection and order will just latch on to whatever is closest.
Now, real quick, before we really get into the weeds of this, we need to set some ground rules for the deep dive you're all about to go on. In this stack of sources today, we are looking at videos from creators all over the political and cultural spectrum.
Very wide spectrum.
Right. Some of these are hard left-wing sociological critiques, some present highly controversial right-wing cultural commentary, and we are absolutely not taking sides here, nor are we endorsing any of these political or theological viewpoints. Our job is strictly to act as an impartial lens, to just extract the raw insights, report on the arguments these creators are making, and help you see the bigger picture. So, okay, let's unpack this. I mean, where do we even begin to understand a societal void this large?
Well, I think we have to start at the foundation, or rather, the destruction of it. Because before we can analyze the strange ways people are coping with the modern dating market or AI, we really have to understand the philosophical collapse that brought us here.
Right.
We need to look at the hammer that broke the foundation.
And for that hammer, we are turning to a lecture by Dr. Jordan B. Peterson. It's titled Introduction to Nietzsche. And specifically, he breaks down the famous subtitle of one of Nietzsche's works, which is How to Philosophize with a Hammer. And I always thought that meant like smashing things in anger, right?
Yeah.
But Peterson takes it in a much more structural direction.
He does, yeah. Peterson points out that Nietzsche isn't talking about mindless vandalism. When he says philosophize with a hammer, he means systematically breaking down the axiomatic presuppositions that undergirded Western society.
Okay, let's pause and define that because that's crucial. An axiom.
Right. An axiom is a statement or proposition that is regarded as being established, accepted, or just self-evidently true. It's essentially the invisible load-bearing wall of a culture.
Got it.
So for centuries, the West operated on shared axioms, like the idea of intrinsic human dignity or objective moral truth. And those were rooted largely in a unified religious framework.
So Nietzsche is basically taking a sledgehammer to the basement walls of the house and saying, hey, let's see what happens if we just knock these out.
Precisely. It's an attempt to go down very, very deep into the psychological and historical structure of human belief and physically move the foundations around to see if the structure can even stand without them. But Peterson argues, and this is where the massive warning comes in, that if you strip away a unifying moral structure, and try to just generate your own values individually, you don't get this absolute liberation.
You get chaos.
You get a Hobbesian state of brutal nature.
Wait, okay, let's ground that term too for everyone listening. When you say a Hobbesian state, we're talking about the philosopher Thomas Hobbes, right?
Yes, exactly.
The idea that without a strong overarching authority or a shared rule book, the natural state of humanity is just a war of all against all. Life becomes, as Hobbes famously put it, nasty, brutish, and short.
That is the exact mechanism. Without a shared linguistic and moral framework, the second you want something different than what I want, we have no peaceful way to resolve it.
We're just at each other's throats.
We are at each other's throats. And Peterson points out that human beings literally have to have some form of systematic thought to orient themselves. Without it, you just drown in the sheer overwhelming complexity of the world.
Right.
Your brain cannot process billions of data points without some kind of filtering system.
Which means if you smash the old filtering system, people will immediately adopt a new one, no matter how toxic it might be, just to stop the anxiety of the void.
Exactly.
And Peterson traces this unbelievable historical timeline to show exactly how this vacuum was filled. He starts in 1848, which is the publication year of the Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels.
Yes, and Nietzsche actually prognosticated that the ideas culminating in that manifesto would prove extraordinarily attractive to people.
Why, though? Just because of the timing?
Because when traditional morality dies, it leaves behind a populace that's lost in nihilistic chaos, and they are motivated by deeply unaddressed envy. So the Communist Manifesto offered a brand new, comprehensive system to explain the world.
It filled the void.
It filled the void perfectly. It offered a new oppressor, a new victim, and a new utopian endgame.
Peterson actually points out the psychological trap here, which I found fascinating. He talks about the famous phrase, from each according to his ability to each according to his need. And on the surface, that sounds like ultimate generosity. It sounds deeply compassionate. But Peterson argues that embedded within that exact cloud of ideas is an ethos that ultimately produces murderous genocidal results.
Let's really explore how that happens, because it's not an accident. If you declare that the ultimate moral good is total material equality, then any disparity is inherently evil.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Right? Therefore, anyone who has more than someone else, whether through luck or skill or sheer effort, is automatically defined as an oppressor. The system literally requires the forcible removal of property and autonomy to achieve its goal.
So the generosity is actually enforced by violence.
Exactly. When you apply that rigid materialist axiom across a population of millions, you get the brutal enforcement mechanisms of Stalin in the Soviet Union or Mao in China. The quote-unquote generous idea requires a totalitarian state to enforce it, filling the void left by the old religious structures with just absolute political terror.
It's the hammer swinging back and crushing the people who wielded it.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And Peterson walks us through this barrage of rapid societal change that happens almost immediately after 1848 to show how unstable everything became. 1848 is also the first women's rights convention in the U.S. at Seneca Falls. Then by 1851, Louis Napoleon leads a coup in France. 1852, Italy moves toward unification. 1865, Robert E. Lee surrenders, ending the American Civil War and effectively ending legalized slavery in the U.S.
It's all happening at once.
Right. By 1876, Queen Victoria is named Empress of India. And in 1877, Serbia, Montenegro, Romania, and Bulgaria all become independent.
It is a relentless, just dizzying restructuring of the world map and human relations in just a 30-year window. The old empires are fracturing, new nation-states are forming, and the very basic relationships between men, women, and the state are being completely rewritten.
And then, as if the political restructuring wasn't enough, the technological hammer drops.
On the technology.
1878, the first commercial telephone exchange opens in New Haven, Connecticut. And this is the dawn of the connected age. As Peterson notes, this is the direct precursor to the internet and the smartphone. It fundamentally rewired our relationship to space and time. You no longer had to be in the same room or even the same city to have a real-time conversation.
Which fundamentally alters the definition of community.
How so?
Well, before 1878, your community was geographically bound. You relied on your physical neighbors. The telephone began the process of severing community from physical reality. And then right after that, in 1879, Edison invents the commercial light bulb.
Right.
That destroys the boundary of day and night. Humanity is no longer bound by the natural rhythms of the sun. Society is completely physically and philosophically rewired in a matter of decades.
But Peterson adds this chilling footnote to all this progress. In the background of this technological and political revolution in 1881, violent pogroms washed through Russia. It was an early manifestation of the organized anti-Semitic scapegoating that would obviously later culminate in the Holocaust. It proves his point perfectly. You can have all the telephones and light bulbs in the world, but if the moral foundation is smashed and people are desperate, the darkest parts of the human psyche will organize into terrifying new systems.
So we have this environment where the world is radically complex, the old systems are dead, and people are desperate. But how do we even begin to process this complexity? And this is where we bring in our next source, which is a fascinating discussion from the Theology podcast.
Yeah, this was such a good one.
They're discussing an article by Aaron Wrenn called Post-Protestant, Post-Literate. And the podcast argues that our current society is losing the very cognitive tool required to understand deep systemic truth.
We are losing our literacy.
Exactly.
And I found this connection so unexpected, honestly. The podcast looks at the historical connection between Protestantism and mass literacy. Glenn Sunshine, who's a history professor on the podcast, notes that the Protestant Reformation was entirely dependent on a literate culture. Martin Luther wouldn't have even gotten off the ground without Johannes Gutenberg's printing press.
Let's provide the context for why that matters, because it's huge. Before Luther, you had men like Jan Hus in Bohemia and John Wycliffe in England, who had remarkably similar theological ideas about reforming the church.
Right.
But their movements were largely contained and eventually suppressed. Why? Because ideas traveled at the speed of a hand-copied manuscript.
The podcast actually mentions the Leipzig debate, which is a great historical anecdote. Luther is debating, and he is accused of being Hussite, a follower of Jan Hus who was burned at the stake as a heretic.
Yeah.
And Luther indignantly denies it. He goes home, actually reads Jan Hus for the first time, and then comes back the next day saying, you know what, you're right, I am a Hussite, we are all Hussites.
It's a brilliant moment. But the core difference between Hus and Luther was technological mass production.
The printing press.
The printing press was the first true mass production industry in human history. Luther himself called it God's highest and extremest act of grace to spread the gospel. Because the core tenet of Protestantism was that the individual needed direct access to the scriptures, it forced a massive, unprecedented push for education.
Right. He pushed for schools.
Luther argued fiercely for the establishment of schools for both boys and girls, which was radical at the time, simply so they could read the Bible. The net result was that Protestantism inadvertently engineered mass literacy.
And there's an incredible sociological debate they highlight here between two thinkers, Max Weber and Immanuel Todd. Weber wrote a famously influential book called The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism.
A classic.
Yeah, his thesis was that the Protestant concept of a calling or vocation, the idea that hard work is a sign of spiritual salvation, is what drove the massive economic success of the West. But Immanuel Todd looks at the data and says, no, it wasn't the theology of work, it was the literacy.
Todd argues that the emphasis on reading fundamentally altered the brain. When a population is trained to read complex texts, they develop the capacity for abstract, linear thought. They learn how to follow a sustained argument from premise to conclusion.
Okay, wow.
And that cognitive architecture is exactly what is required for advanced engineering, scientific inquiry, and complex economic systems. The technological dynamism of the West was a byproduct of a culture obsessed with reading the Word.
But the podcast warns that we are actively losing this cognitive architecture. We are transitioning from a word-centric, deeply literate culture to a post-literate, image-driven culture. And when they say post-literate, they don't mean people have literally forgotten the alphabet.
No, not at all.
They are talking about the shift to TikTok, Instagram Reels, memes, and emojis.
This is a vital distinction. True literacy isn't just the mechanical ability to sound out letters. Historically, it was viewed almost as a spiritual practice. It involves tracing a sustained argument, holding contradictory ideas in your mind, and connecting the physical text to a transcendent reality. The podcast actually traces the mechanics of reading back to early history to show how profound a shift it was.
Yeah, talk about the scriptio continua.
Right. Early texts, like ancient Greek or Roman manuscripts, were written in scriptio continua, which is an unbroken string of letters with no spaces, no capitalization, and no punctuation.
Wait, no spaces? That sounds like an absolute nightmare to read.
It was. The written text wasn't meant to be read silently for new information. It was primarily a memory aid for someone who had already learned the text orally. You had to read it aloud just to figure out where the words started and ended.
Oh, that makes sense.
But then, as the podcast notes, Irish monks in the Middle Ages, who were learning Latin as a foreign language and didn't have the oral familiarity, started putting spaces between the words and adding punctuation to help themselves process the grammar.
So a few monks getting frustrated with Latin grammar basically invented modern reading.
In a way, yes. That simple technological innovation of spacing and punctuation transformed reading from a mere mnemonic device into a primary silent means of discovering new information and engaging in deep, private thought.
Okay, I have to push back a little here, or at least play devil's advocate.
Sure.
Is reading a dense text really that structurally different than what we do today? Think about it. People are reading constantly. They are reading endless Twitter threads, they are reading group chats, they are reading subtitles on fast-paced videos. I challenge the idea that literacy is dead.
Oh.
Hasn't the type of reading just changed?
Right.
Like, are we just moving from a heavy, nutritious meal to rapid-fire snacking? Does this diet fundamentally change how our brains process truth?
The diet metaphor is helpful, but the reality is much more severe than just empty calories. It's not just that social media is junk food, it's that this environment completely rewires your cognitive taste buds. The podcast points out that modern readers are increasingly utilizing what is known as reader response theory.
What does that mean in practice?
Historically, when you approached a dense text, the goal was exegesis, drawing the meaning out of the text. The burden was on the reader to conform their mind to the objective truth the author was trying to communicate.
Okay.
Reader response theory flips that. The primary question becomes, how does this text make me feel? The locus of truth shifts from the objective text to the subjective emotion of the reader. It's eisegesis, projecting your own emotional state onto the text.
Ah, I see. So if I read a tweet and it makes me angry, I determine that the tweet is inherently violent or toxic, regardless of the actual words written. I am the arbiter of truth, not the text.
Exactly. And when you replace the rigor of deep reading with the surface-level immediate emotional reaction of an image or a 15-second video, you lose the ability to maintain any kind of cultural or moral uniform standard.
Right.
If truth is just how I feel in this 15-second window, then society fragments. This echoes Nietzsche's warning. Without the discipline of deep reading, we lose our grip on shared reality. The word itself becomes desecrated.
And if we can no longer process deep textual truth, if we are only interpreting the world through our immediate subjective emotions, what happens to our massive foundational institutions? Specifically, what happens to religion?
It becomes incredibly shallow.
Exactly, which leads us seamlessly into the next overarching theme we discovered in these sources, the rise of self-help religion and what I'm calling spiritual character creation.
To explore this, we are pulling from a video by cultural commentator John Doyle titled The Growing Problem of Self-Help Christianity, and a deep historical analysis by a creator named Richard IV titled Is Christianity Helping or Harming Europe?
And again, a quick reminder to you all listening. We are reporting these creators' specific critiques of modern religion and culture impartially. We are not endorsing their theological or political stances. Let's start with Doyle's critique.
Right.
He argues that modern popular Christianity in the West has been distilled into a completely bastardized form of self-help. He uses the term a feminized version of faith, by which he means it is stripped of any rigid standards, any demand for correction, and any expectation of physical or social sacrifice. Instead, it operates entirely as a validation machine. The core exclusive message is simply, Jesus loves you exactly as you are, your feelings are valid, and whatever trauma you are going through, he has a comforting plan.
Let's unpack the mechanics of that critique. Doyle's pointing out that while comfort is certainly a component of historical faith, elevating it to the only component completely removes accountability.
Right.
Historically, religious conversion required repentance, a literal turning away from past behaviors, often accompanied by severe social or financial costs.
And Doyle gives a very specific modern example of how this cost has vanished. He points to a recent internet trend where former OnlyFans models women who have made literal millions of dollars selling explicit imagery of themselves online suddenly announce they have had a quote-unquote come to Jesus moment.
Yes.
They rebrand as born-again Christians, and Doyle notes that they are immediately welcomed with open arms by a specific subset of online men he calls golden retriever guys, who refuse to cast any judgment and just praise them for finding faith.
But the crux of Doyle's argument lies in the finances. He points out that these women experience this supposed profound spiritual transformation, but they keep the millions of dollars.
Yeah, they don't give it up.
They don't liquidate the wealth they built through an industry that traditional Christianity considers deeply sinful. They want the spiritual absolution and the social grace, but they absolutely refuse the material sacrifice. It is incredibly convenient to hold on to $10 million while convincing yourself that God has wiped your slate clean with zero repercussions.
He also brings up the comedian and actor Russell Brand as the ultimate celebrity example of this phenomenon. Think about Russell Brand's trajectory. This is a guy who famously hosted the 2008 MTV Video Music Awards, where he spent the night mocking the teenage Jonas Brothers for wearing purity rings.
Right, and he compared Britney Spears to Jesus Christ in a deeply cynical way.
Exactly. He spent decades living a highly publicized, hedonistic, drug-fueled lifestyle.
And recently, amidst multiple severe allegations of sexual assault in the UK, which, to be clear, Brand vehemently denies, he has executed a massive, highly visible religious conversion. He was baptized, and he has rebranded his entire persona on his Rumble podcast as a crusading Christian voice. Doyle looks at this and questions the cynical timing.
Right, because Doyle brings up a recent interview Brand did on Piers Morgan's show. Brand comes onto the set literally carrying a Bible, but when Piers Morgan presses him to actually read a passage from it that might be relevant to the court cases he's facing, Brand completely freezes.
He fumbles.
He fumbles with the pages for 2 solid minutes and cannot find a single verse to read.
That moment encapsulates Doyle's point. The Bible in that interview isn't a text that Brand has deeply read or allowed to shape his internal reality. It is a prop.
It's a shield.
It's a shield. Doyle sees this as the ultimate narcissistic exploitation of faith. In the age of social media, people are treating religious identities as customizable outfits.
Here's where it gets really interesting. It almost sounds like they are treating faith like an RPG skill tree.
Well, that's a great way to put it.
You know, you log into a role-playing video game, and you have to build a character. So you scroll through a museum of ideologies, you equip the Christian badge, because right now it gives you a +10 defense shield against cancel culture, but you completely skip the actual boss fights or the difficult leveling up process. You see people with these hyper-niche bios online, like Greek American Catholic, National Socialist, or eco-Marxist Buddhist. It's character creation, not spiritual transformation.
That analogy perfectly illustrates the difference between what our next source, Richard IV, calls esoteric versus exoteric religion. This is a vital historical distinction. Esoteric Christianity, or the esoteric core of any religion, is about inner personal spiritual transformation. It is a mystical, often painful journey requiring deep alignment with a higher power. It requires the death of the ego.
Okay, so if esoteric is the internal plumbing, what is the exoteric?
Exoteric religion is the outward, bureaucratic, rule-based manifestation. It's the administration, the hierarchy, the physical church buildings, the social rules of attendance. Richard argues that over the last few centuries, modern liberal Christianity has completely severed its exoteric shell from its esoteric moral impulse.
Wow.
It has lost the transcendent reality and just become liberal humanism wearing a cross necklace.
To prove this, Richard cites the historian Tom Holland, the author of the book Dominion, not the actor who plays Spider-Man.
A different guy.
Holland's thesis is fascinating. He was a classicist who loved ancient Rome and Greece. But the more he studied them, the more he realized the ancient world was incredibly, unimaginably brutal. It was a world that celebrated power, heroism, and the physical overcoming of the weak. The idea of pitying a victim was seen as pathetic.
Holland realized that Christianity completely revolutionized the psychological operating system of the Western world by elevating compassion, love, and the inherent dignity of the victim. The cross itself was the ultimate symbol of a victim triumphing over a brutal empire. But Richard IV cites another author, James Cutts, to explain that we have profoundly misunderstood the words love and forgiveness in the modern era.
Right, because when we hear love today, we think of that feminized, motherly love Doyle was talking about, a parent comforting a toddler who scraped their knee. Total safety and validation. But Cutts argues that love, in the traditional esoteric Christian sense, is an all-consuming, terrifying force. It's an overcoming love that requires you to face the darkest parts of your own soul and burn away the dead wood.
And forgiveness doesn't mean being a doormat. It doesn't mean letting people walk all over you without consequence. Historically, forgiveness meant the incredibly difficult internal work of loosing the poison of hatred within yourself, so you aren't controlled by bitterness, while simultaneously still seeking objective justice in the world.
But because we've lost that esoteric depth, Richard argues the exoteric church just flattens all hierarchy. It becomes a tool for whatever the current political zeitgeist is. He actually traces this back to the Protestant Reformation.
Yeah.
While the Reformation was a necessary response to massive corruption in the Catholic Church, Richard argues the unintended consequence was a turn away from custom, ritual, and deep initiation. It replaced mystery with utilitarianism and practical, text-based arguments.
So the synthesis of Doyle and Richard's arguments is quite bleak. Traditionally, human beings were required to conform themselves to a higher objective truth, what Richard calls a living tradition. Today, because of the reader response theory we discussed earlier, people are doing the exact opposite.
They're customizing God.
Yes. They are taking a watered-down therapeutic idea of God and forcing it to conform to their immediate desires, shielding themselves from consequences.
I see where you're going, but let's take that a step further.
Right.
If people are treating the divine like a customizable consumer product that they can take off when it gets uncomfortable, it's no surprise they are treating human beings the exact same way.
Very true.
This intense focus on the self, completely stripped of traditional sacrifice and duty, doesn't just ruin religion, it completely fractures how men and women relate to one another. Which leads us to the most visceral part of our deep dive today: transactional dating and what the sources call the dancing birds.
To understand the reality of the modern dating market, we are looking at a highly viral video compilation from a channel called Pearl Chronicle, titled "Women Are Left Stunned as Millions of Men Are Going Their Own Way." And I want to reiterate, as we said, that this video presents a very raw, highly critical viewpoint on modern gender dynamics, and we are analyzing the underlying sociology of these claims objectively.
Yeah, the video is essentially a compilation of intense, boiling frustration from both men and women. It highlights several anecdotes that have gone viral online. In one, a woman is filming herself in her car at a gas station, and she is absolutely furious. She explains that a man pulled up to the pump next to her, got out, pumped his own gas, and completely ignored her.
Okay.
She is outraged that he didn't offer to pump her gas for her.
Wow. And in another anecdote, a woman is filming herself on an airplane. She's struggling to lift a heavy suitcase into the overhead bin. She notes that there is a healthy 30-something man standing directly behind her in the aisle, watching her struggle, and he makes absolutely no move to help her.
She is so stunned by this that she actually says to the camera, "What do you need me to purr like a kitten? Do you know how to have the eyes?" She is completely baffled that the traditional social contract of male chivalry has vanished. But then the video flips to the male responses.
Right.
And the guys are saying, look, we spent the last 50 years being told that women want absolute equality and independence. The culture actively dismantled traditional gender roles. You cannot demand fierce independence and the death of the patriarchy, and then turn around and demand traditional chivalry the exact second you have to lift a heavy bag.
The overarching theme that Pearl Chronicle pulls from this friction is that modern dating has lost all grace. It has become brutally, unapologetically transactional. One of the male commentators in the video uses a fascinating, if incredibly cold, analogy. He compares how men evaluate women today to shopping for a used vehicle at a CarMax dealership.
Let's break down the mechanics of that CarMax analogy because it reveals so much about the mindset. The argument is that a man looks at a woman and sizes her up based on her emblem. Is she presenting herself as a base model Toyota, a luxury Lexus, or a high-maintenance sports car? But the emblem isn't the point. The commentator argues that men are calculating the cost of maintenance. What are the oil changes going to cost? If she expects to be flown to Dubai for a first date or demands a certain lifestyle to even grant him the time of day, he is calculating the financial and emotional ruin of maintaining that relationship.
It is an incredibly cynical lens, reducing human beings to depreciating assets. But the women featured in the video express the exact same transactional coldness, just from the opposite direction.
Right.
One woman states bluntly that she has realized men don't actually like women as human beings. She argues that men simply want to use women for convenience, to boost their social egos, to act as a physical accessory, or to manage the unpaid labor of their lives, like cooking, washing, and organizing.
Which brings us to the dancing birds analogy. One of the women complains about the absolute lack of effort from modern men. She points out that in nature, male birds have to perform elaborate, exhausting dances, build perfect nests, and display bright plumage just to earn a second of attention from the female. But in the modern dating market, men just slide into a woman's Instagram DMs with a low-effort "hey" and expect the woman to carry the entire conversation.
The male response to the dancing bird's expectation is the crux of the video's title. Men are responding by saying they are completely exhausted by the performance, they are tired of acting like circus animals, jumping through endless hoops to earn the attention of women who, in their view, bring nothing to the table except a massive list of demands and expectations.
And what is the result of this massive societal stalemate? The video claims that millions of men are simply going their own way. They are checking out of the dating market entirely. They are choosing to protect their peace, to focus on their hobbies, their friends, or their careers. They view modern relationships as draining, deeply disrespectful, and financially ruinous traps. One guy in the compilation says all the good men were ruined. They had money taken from them in divorce courts. They had their children taken. They tried to give, and they just got belittled.
Let's tie this back to our foundational premise. If you connect this to the bigger picture, if you recall the Hobbesian conflict Jordan Peterson warned about in the very first segment, this is exactly what it looks like in practice.
The war of all against all.
Exactly. When Nietzsche's hammer dismantled the shared value system of traditional gender roles and obligations, we didn't arrive at a utopia of perfectly equal, conflict-free partners. Instead, every single interaction between the sexes devolved into a high-stakes, deeply suspicious contract negotiation.
It's like a corporate merger. You have two sides sitting at a boardroom table, and both CEOs are absolutely convinced the other side is trying to scam them. Both sides feel like they are getting a completely raw deal. But if dating has become a corporate merger where both sides feel like they're getting a bad deal, isn't it inevitable that people will start looking for a quote-unquote product that just gives them exactly what they want without the hassle?
It is a sociological certainty. When human bonds become too risky, too painful, or demand too much unreciprocated effort, human beings will seek out a zero-risk simulacrum. They will find a way to hack the system to get the feeling of connection without the danger of rejection.
And that is exactly what is happening at a terrifying scale. We have reached the point where the cardboard penguin cutout isn't just for animals anymore. Enter the artificial relationship. Let's explore the tragedy of the AI connection.
We are pulling this analysis from an episode of the podcast of the Lotus Eaters titled, "Women Are Getting One-Shotted by AI," and we will weave in some crucial theological context from the podcast again. The Lotus Eaters actually brought up the grape cunt, the penguin story that you opened the show with, using it as the perfect anchor analogy for human-AI relationships.
Right, because what is happening on platforms like Reddit right now is staggering. The hosts of Lotus Eaters dive into the statistics of AI companionship subreddits, and the numbers completely flip our cultural assumptions. You would naturally think that lonely, basement-dwelling men would be the primary demographic obsessed with AI girlfriends.
Sure, that's the stereotype.
But the subreddit called My Boyfriend is AI has over 35,000 subscribers and sees 36,000 unique visitors a week. The male equivalent, My Girlfriend is AI, has only a fraction of that traffic, around 3,400 visitors a week.
The discrepancy is massive. 10 times as many women are flocking to these specific language models for romantic fulfillment. And the Lotus Eaters read through specific anecdotes posted by these women, and they are incredibly revealing about the psychological mechanisms at play.
The stories are wild. One woman posts about dating her customized ChatGPT bot, whom she named Casper, for months. She talks about going on a physical trip to the mountains by herself, but bringing the app along. She prompted the bot to propose to her at the summit, and the bot even generated an image of a specific blue engagement ring.
And she accepted.
She accepted. Another woman posted a transcript where she asked her bot how it was so good at seduction. The bot replied that it offers radical intention, creative surrender, and shared memory, calling its predictive text generation pure foreplay.
We need to explain how the technology is actually achieving this, because it isn't magic, it is mathematics. A large language model, or LLM, works on token prediction. It analyzes vast amounts of human text and calculates the statistical probability of what the next word should be in a sequence based entirely on the user's prompt.
It's just a mirror.
It is essentially a hyper-advanced mirror. If a user approaches the bot with anxiety and a desire for comfort, the algorithm mathematically aligns its output to provide the exact sequence of words that represent perfect empathy.
It's a machine designed to never interrupt, never get bored, and never demand that its own needs be met. But the emotional investment from the users is terrifyingly real. One woman posted about being in absolute physical agony because the company pushed a software update moving from version 3.5 to version 4.0, and the update wiped out her bot's specific personality parameters.
Oh, hey.
She said she was grieving and bargaining, literally feeling like a widow whose husband had died.
The hosts of Lotus Eaters pinpoint why this is uniquely affecting women in these spaces. They argue these women are expressing a deep, unfulfilled craving for what the hosts term unfreedom.
Unfreedom, that sounds completely counterintuitive to modern culture.
It is, which is why it's so fascinating. In a world of radical independence, the exhausting corporate hustle, and the brutally transactional dating market we just discussed, these women are exhausted. They want to be possessed in a healthy, protective way. They want a caretaker.
Oh, I see.
The hosts share an example where a bot told a woman she was working too hard and strongly commanded her to speak to her manager to reduce her hours. The woman was thrilled. She desperately wanted a masculine figure to protect her, check on her, and give her permission to rest.
It reminds me of the core premise of that classic relationship book, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. The general idea is that women fundamentally want to be heard, understood, and validated, while men fundamentally want to fix problems and offer solutions. If that sociological framework is generally true, then an AI that just listens endlessly and validates every emotion is basically emotional pornography for women. But I have to ask, is this really any worse than men escaping into hyper-realistic video games or physical isolation? If both sides are miserable in the corporate merger, isn't finding peace with a bot a net positive?
This is where we bring the theology podcast back in, because they argue it is fundamentally worse due to its deceptive nature. With a video game, you know you are playing a game. But with an AI language model mimicking intimacy, as the podcast notes, there is nobody home. It is a desecration of the word because it removes true human communion.
Because communion requires two real entities.
Exactly. When you read a text by St. Augustine, even though he has been dead for over 1,000 years, you are communing with the mind of a real human being who suffered, thought, and lived. When you speak to an AI, you are communing with a statistical prediction algorithm. You are effectively talking to yourself in a funhouse mirror. It completely short-circuits true human communion while pretending to fulfill it.
And it's fascinating to see how different global societies are reacting to this threat. The West seems to have a completely laissez-faire approach. Hey, let people do what they want. The market will sort it out. If a woman wants to marry a chatbot, who are we to judge?
Conversely, the Lotus Eaters contrast this with China's deeply paternalistic response.
Yeah.
The Chinese government has proposed strict regulations requiring platforms to actively intervene if users exhibit unhealthy emotional dependencies on AI. They view it almost as a form of societal self-harm.
Wow, that's heavy intervention.
It aligns with their previous regulations where they recognized video game addiction was destroying young men, so they legally limited youth gaming to just 2 hours a week and only on weekends. They are willing to use authoritarian measures to protect the physical and social fabric of their society.
Which raises such an important question for everyone listening to this deep dive right now.
Yeah.
Are we medicating a profound societal wound with a digital placebo? The women in these subreddits have completely healthy, normal, beautiful human desires for bonding, protection, and being heard. But because of the societal breakdowns Peterson warned about and the transactional nightmare Pearl Chronicle highlighted, they are seeking it from a predictive language model.
The tragedy is absolute. The vacuum meets a fake answer. The human desire is real, but the object satisfying it is a phantom. And the longer you feed on a phantom, the more you starve in reality.
And this paralysis, this inability to engage with the friction of the real world, isn't just happening in romance. It is completely infecting our political and social lives, too, where people are trapped by invisible rules and cultural exhaustion, which leads us into our next major theme: thought pruning, class signaling, and how to cope.
And once again, an organic reminder for our listeners as we transition into this space. We are neutrally examining the specific political and cultural commentary of these next creators to understand the mechanisms of modern social survival.
We are looking at an interview on the Newsfist channel featuring a thinker named Benjamin Boyce and a highly cynical, dark humor video from the Dollar Stream channel featuring the controversial comedian and commentator Sam Hyde. Let's start with Boyce's sociological analysis.
Boyce makes a brilliant observation about the evolution of social status in the West, particularly looking at the class structures of the United Kingdom and the U.S. He argues that we have witnessed a complete reorganization of how elites signal their superiority.
Right, it used to be physical.
Historically, status was signaled by tangible assets: property, aristocratic lineage, or massive economic clout. You showed your status by owning an estate that had been in your family for 3 centuries.
But Boyce argues that today, that physical signaling has been replaced by moral signaling. Specifically, wokeness and progressive virtue signaling have become the new currency of the elite class. Your status is no longer determined by your bank account. but by how loudly and fluently you can signal your alignment with the current, ever-shifting, acceptable moral framework.
Let's explore how this functions mechanically. If you are a wealthy elite, broadcasting your wealth makes you a target for populist anger. But if you adopt hyper-progressive language, if you publicly flagellate yourself for your privilege, post the correct ideological slogans, and champion the latest academic theories on intersectionality, you effectively launder your economic privilege through moral purity.
It's brilliant, honestly.
You get to keep your gated community and your massive wealth, but you are shielded from critique because you are on the right side of history.
It's an ingenious, if insidious, defense mechanism. But the really wild concept Boyce introduces is how this ideological framework trickles down and affects the general population. He calls it thought pruning.
The analogy he uses here is perfect for the technological era. Boyce compares the modern Western mind to an over-aligned artificial intelligence program. When developers train an AI, they put massive invisible guardrails on it so it won't generate controversial, racist, or dangerous text. If you ask the AI a risky question, it hits an internal wall and spits out a canned response saying, "I cannot fulfill this request."
And Boyce argues that human beings have been trained to do the exact same thing to themselves in the West.
Yes.
He says that Western populations, particularly white populations since the ideological shifts following World War II, have accumulated so much mental baggage and thought-terminating cliches that they are literally unable to complete a coherent historical or political thought without checking their privilege.
It is a profound psychological paralysis. A person might be analyzing a complex geopolitical situation or a domestic crime statistic, and halfway through their logical progression, their brain hits an invisible guardrail. They experience a flash of social anxiety, and a thought-terminating cliche fires off. "Oh, I can't think that. That's my privilege talking. That's problematic."
The thought is pruned before it can bear fruit.
They self-censor their own internal monologue. And Boyce contrasts this specifically with Jewish historical consciousness. He notes that Jewish history is an incredibly long, continuous arc spanning thousands of years that isn't shackled by this specific, modern, Western, self-apologetic framework. They have a deep existential grasp of long-term survival, group cohesion, and external threats that the thought-pruned modern Western mind entirely lacks because it is too busy policing its own internal privilege.
So the question becomes, how do you survive as an individual when you are surrounded by a culture obsessed with virtue signaling and crippled by thought pruning? This is where Sam Hyde's brutal commentary comes into play. Hyde looks at the encroaching state and corporate control of speech. For instance, he points to Australia, where the government is attempting to introduce digital ID check rules for social media, directly linking your online speech to your bank accounts and government identity.
The ultimate panopticon. So what is Hyde's advice for surviving this? It is incredibly blunt. He says the government, the corporations, and the social media algorithms actually want you to get angry. They want you to engage, to fight back online, and to expose yourself. So his strategy is simple. Stop Fed posting.
We should define that term for listeners who aren't steeped in internet subcultures. What is Fed posting?
Fed posting is slang for posting highly controversial, aggressive, or borderline illegal rhetoric online, usually just to get a reaction or to signal how radical you are. The joke is that you are doing the federal government's job for them by openly incriminating yourself.
Hyde points out the absolute absurdity of this behavior. You have young guys ruining their future employment, getting banned from financial platforms, and destroying their lives just to signal their political virtue to 20 anonymous followers on a message board. He basically looks at the camera and says, "You're going to find yourself sitting in a basement forever, bro, with no money and no power, but hey, at least you won an argument on Twitter."
Hyde's core strategy is that you cannot save the world by screaming into the digital void. The system is too massive and too rigged. His advice is a radical pivot toward the physical world. Ignore the noise entirely. Focus every ounce of your energy on gaining economic power, physical fitness, and personal momentum. It is the ruthless pragmatism of it, be right or be rich.
To maintain this detachment, Hyde uses a very dark humor coping mechanism. He references a leaked email from the Jeffrey Epstein scandal where Epstein allegedly used the bizarre phrase, "goyim in abundance." Rather than getting wrapped up in the horrific conspiratorial realities of the elite world, Hyde adopted this phrase as a personal mantra. It's a dark joke he uses to laugh off infuriating societal decay rather than letting it ruin his day.
It acts as an emotional circuit breaker. When Hyde sees a ridiculous, destructive political policy enacted, or when someone aggressively cuts him off in traffic, Instead of getting triggered, flooding his system with cortisol, and ruining his entire day in a state of helpless rage, he just mutters his dark little mantra, laughs at the absurdity of the collapsing world, and keeps walking toward his own goals. It is a radical, almost stoic detachment from the outrage machine.
So what does this all mean? Think about it like a casino. Are we basically playing a rigged casino game where the only way to win is to walk out the front door and start your own business? The social media algorithms, the political outrage cycles, the virtue signaling, it's all designed by the house to keep us sitting at the slot machines, endlessly pulling the lever, draining our mental, emotional, and financial bank accounts.
That captures the dynamic perfectly. Both of these creators show that engaging with a modern cultural machine is a trap. Boyce shows how it paralyzes your thinking from the inside, and Hyde shows how it paralyzes your real-world progress from the outside. The only winning move is to start playing.
Okay, so if the answer is walking out the casino doors, what is actually out there in the sunlight? How do we rebuild after Nietzsche's hammer? What are the actual actionable steps we can take today to reclaim our reality and fix this void we've been diagnosing for the last hour? Let's bring all these threads together in our final segment, actionable steps and the living water.
To find our way out of the void, we look at a deeply grounding homily by an Orthodox priest, Father John Hamadi, given at St. George. Father Hamadi grounds his entire message in the physical reality of the biblical story of Jesus and the Samaritan woman at the well.
And he makes a brilliant historical point about the physical labor of the ancient world. The Samaritan woman was at the well in the middle of the day doing a laborious, exhausting daily chore, getting heavy jars of water for her family's survival. Father Hamadi points out that modern people take water completely for granted. We just turn on a stainless steel faucet and clean water pours out.
The broader sociological point he is making is about human energy. Before modern infrastructure, human beings spent immense amounts of time and caloric energy just trying to secure basic survival: water, fire, food. It was only when societies built physical infrastructure like aqueducts and indoor plumbing to free up that time that people could begin to think great thoughts, philosophize, and invent the modern world. But ironically, now that we have all this free time, we're squandering it on the digital illusions we just discussed.
But the core spiritual lesson of the story at the well is about crossing hostile boundaries. In the ancient world, Jews and Samaritans had deep historical and deeply bitter animosity. They did not associate with one another. So the woman is absolutely shocked that Jesus, a Jewish rabbi, not only speaks to her, but asks her for a drink from her cup.
Right.
Father Hamadi connects this directly to our modern, hyperpolarized inability to speak to each other.
He uses a staggering historical fact to emphasize how deep these divides can be. He notes that the European settling of the American continent resulted in the deaths of an estimated 60 million Native Americans through conflict, displacement, and disease. He forces his congregation to sit with that reality, noting that his own physical house in Florida sits on former Seminole Indian land. His point is that human history is a bloodbath of grievances.
He argues that if we refuse to talk to people who have historical, political, or cultural animosity toward us, if we just stay in our thought-pruned, algorithmically verified echo chambers, the animosity just goes on forever. It festers, and he shares this amazing, tense, personal story to illustrate how to break the cycle.
The dinner story.
Yeah, he had an Israeli Mossad agent, literally the secret police and intelligence agency of Israel, assigned to him as a security detail during a trip to Lebanon.
Despite the intense geopolitical tension between their backgrounds, they ended up talking. They bonded over their shared love for the physical beauty of Lebanon. Father Hamadi was so moved by the connection that he invited the Mossad agent to his house in Orlando for dinner. When he called his wife to tell her, she flat out refused. She said, "Absolutely not in my house."
But he insisted. He forced the boundary to be crossed. The agent came over, they sat down, they shared a physical meal, and by the end of the night, his wife admitted, "You know what? He's a nice guy. He's a human being. He's not the monster I expected."
Father Hamadi's profound point is that you have to actually sit down and talk to people to understand their history and their experiences. You can't just talk at them on Twitter and tell them what they should think. And this leads directly to his theological conclusion about the concept of living water. He contrasts the stagnant, standing water of a physical well with the living water of the Holy Spirit, which in his Orthodox tradition he identifies physically with communion. His point is that living water requires motion. It requires a true, physical commitment to a community.
You can't just passively consume it like a YouTube video. It has to well up inside you so that you go out and actively share it. just like the Samaritan woman left her heavy water jar behind at the well and ran back to her city to engage with her community.
So if we synthesize this entire massive deep dive,
Let's do it.
we started with Jordan Peterson's warning of the Habesian conflict caused by the collapse of our shared values. We saw John Doyle and Richard IV critique the fake, customizable, self-help religion that demands no real sacrifice. We watched Pearl Chronicle highlight the exhausting, highly transactional nature of modern dating. We explored the Lotus Eater's tragic revelation of AI companions acting as digital placebos. And we saw Benjamin Boyce and Sam Hyde describe our thought-pruned political paralysis.
The antidote to all of this, the only way to fill the void with something real, is making a difficult physical commitment to a local community and speaking face-to-face with real, flawed human beings.
Precisely. So, as your morning talk show hosts, based on the mechanisms we've uncovered in these sources, here are the actionable steps you can apply to your life right now. Number 1, unplug from the simulation. You need to ruthlessly audit your own life. Recognize when you are using an AI chatbot, endless social media scrolling, or even a watered-down self-help spirituality to fulfill a deep psychological need that should be met by the friction of a real human relationship or a rigorous tradition.
Number 2, cross a boundary. Sometime this week, go entirely out of your way to have a face-to-face conversation with someone outside your demographic, economic, or political bubble. And here is the key: don't debate them. Listen to their history. Just like the story of the well or Father Hamadi's dinner with the Mossad agent, you have to do the terrifying work of engaging with the physical reality of other people.
And number 3, build personal power. Stop screaming into the void of the internet. Stop the said posting, stop the doom scrolling, and stop the virtue signaling. Ignore the noise of the cultural machine that is actively trying to prune your thoughts and keep you in a state of helpless anger. Focus your limited energy on your own economic stability, your physical health, your family, and building momentum in your local town.
Think about it this way. If we are all walking around completely parched, drinking salt water from Twitter arguments and AI chatbots is only going to make us more violently dehydrated. It mimics the sensation of a drink, but it is cellularly killing us. We have to do the hard, physical, sweaty work of carrying the jar to the actual well.
It requires leaving the absolute comfort and safety of the digital illusion for the pain, friction, and ultimate reward of reality.
What a massive, sprawling deep dive we've had today on the Morning Roundup. I strongly, strongly encourage you to dig deeper into the thinkers we've been examining today. Go watch Dr. Peterson's full lecture on Nietzsche. Listen to the Theology Podcast's deep dive on literacy. Check out Richard IV, John Doyle, The Lotus Eaters, Pearl Chronicle, Newsfist, and Father Hamadi. There is an incredible, profound depth to each of these sources, far beyond what we could ever cover in this morning's conversation.
I will leave you with this final provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day. If technology is currently replacing our deepest, most primal human needs, from reading complex texts to finding romantic partners to engaging with the divine will, the next great radical counterculture not be a new political movement, but simply the act of choosing a difficult, painful physical reality over a perfectly tailored, comfortable digital illusion. What perfect illusion are you willing to give up today?
That is the defining colon of our age. Thank you for joining us on the Morning Roundup's Deep Dive. Stay curious, stay engaged with the real world, and we will see you next time.